Yeah, I'm a good man. I'm just about the only one that says.
Okay, you're a good man. But I'm afraid good men are like the buggy whips. They went out of style.
My name is Rebecca Tweed, and I'm here at the Burnett Memorial Methodist Church with Glen Cardwell, the mayor of Pittman Center. Hello.
Hello.
More?
Well, no, the...
Nervous?
You're doing okay.
My name is Rebecca Tweed, and I'm here at the Burnett Memorial Methodist Church with Glen Cardwell, mayor of Pittman Center. Hi.
Hi, Rebecca.
Thank you for being here today and doing an interview with me.
Glad to be with you.
We're going to ask you a few questions about Pittman Center and its history. Were you born in this community?
No, I was born inside Great Smoky Mountain National Park on Indian Creek.
Okay. Who founded Pittman Center?
Well, Pittman Center is really, let me answer it this way, is older than the nation, or as old as the nation, because, and it's older than the state of Tennessee, because the first visitor that we have on record was Frederick Emmert, and he came in here in 1784 or 85. The records were all destroyed, so it's word of mouth descendant, but we know he was here by 1785, and he was a Revolutionary War soldier, and in those days you got land grants, so he got all of Emmert's Cove, and then his oldest daughter married Martin Schultz, and he was a second landholder and got most of this all the way up Webb's Creek and there to the mouth of Copeland. So we go back to those early days, and the town of Pittman Center itself, as we know it today, was the outgrowth of a dream of Dr. Burnett, John Sevier Burnett, that came here around 1918 or 19, and he had planned and dreamed of wanting to start an educational center where communities like this had been cut off from the rest of the world, that they could have an equal footing for education and also provide some medical services. And he presented his dream to a man called Eli Pittman, Dr. Eli Pittman. Their photographs are hanging on the wall here. And he brought Eli Pittman here, and they walked up on the hill behind the Environmental Center at the confluence of Webb Creek and Little Pigeon. You get a terrific view, or you did in those days. It may be grown up now, but it's quite a level spot of land there, and you think you are in a utopia when you stand there. And he told Dr. Burnett that this is my dream of building a center. And Dr. Burnett told him to present his idea and dream to the National Assembly of the Methodist Conference. And they agreed to buy the land, and providing that Dr. Burnett would be the superintendent of the construction of what was to be called Pittman Community Center, so named in honor of Eli Pittman, because Eli Pittman was behind it 100%, but he also knew a lot of people in upstate New York and in New York City that had the financial means by which could build all the buildings that went into the construction of the community center that was kind of a small campus with buildings separated for each educational pursuit, whether it be manual training or home economics or what have you. And that came about with the school opening up in 1921. And the first graduating class was in 1928. And they tend to have graduation classes until 1963. So basically 35 years of continuous high school and elementary. And then 1963, the two schools, Pi Beta Phi and Pittman Center, consolidated, and they operate today as Gatlinburg Pittman High School, but the elementary school is still here, and we're proud of it. I'm told by our superintendent of schools that Pittman Center Elementary School consistently produces the best academic scores. So that's a compliment to the education that you're receiving here at Pittman Center. That's it in a nutshell. I don't know whether I could add anything else to it or not. But Frederick Emmert is buried in Emmert's Cove. And at one time, that was the...
Emmert being buried in Emmert's Cove.
Frederick Emmert is one of about 40 Revolutionary War soldiers that are buried in, that found their way into Sevier County and stayed here and died. And Frederick Emmert is buried in the Emmert's Cove Cemetery, a plot of land that was deeded to the Methodist Church, and also the first church, the Methodist Church, was built up there, but it fell during a heavy snowstorm in 1885 and never was rebuilt. But it was the only Methodist church for years. Even the people in Gatlinburg that were Methodists would come over to Emmert's Cove to meet and worship with the Methodist folks that had assembled here, usually on a monthly basis. I was talking to you about Dr. Pittman, that was for whom the name was created to give the name Pittman Center. I noticed a while ago, while waiting, his family Bible is on the pulpit in the auditorium of this Burnett Memorial Church. I was reading the family history of the children and all. And I have talked to some of his great-grandchildren that have come back and visited. It's good to have what I call pages of the past come to reveal and tell you what they think about how their great-grandfather got involved in building this center.
Very interesting. Did you attend Pittman Center School?
I attended it for 12 years. I started in 1937 and graduated in 49.
Did you enjoy coming to Pittman Center?
Oh, heavens, yes. They were my happiest days. Entirely different from what the educational system is today, though, I think. The first grade, we did not have kindergarten. The first grade and the second grade had individual teachers, but we lumped together third and fourth was one teacher, fifth and sixth is one teacher, seventh and eighth is one teacher. And then high school, you broke down into various classes depending on what classes you wanted to take as required by the State Department for graduation.
Did you attend college to pursue a career?
Pardon?
Did you attend college to pursue a career?
Well, I think my goal, I've been fairly goal-oriented all my life. I chose to pick my wife out in the first grade. It's funny, but I can tell you all about it. But in the fifth grade, I decided I wanted to teach. And it was interrupted, my college was interrupted by the Korean crisis. I was in the U.S. Navy for 4 years, but when I came out, I finished up at UT and I came back and taught 3 years here at Pittman Center.
What are your duties as the mayor of Pittman Center?
Duties? It's a it's an unpaid position, volunteer work, and conduct monthly meetings as such. We meet the third Thursday of every month to transact any business that's related to the city with the mayor and board of aldermen. And then I attend certain meetings representing Pittman Center, whether it be on a county level or state level or regional level. And that's about it in a nutshell.
For how long have you been historian of the park?
Well, I really wasn't a historian. I was a park ranger. I started in 1961, and it was kind of ironic because I had never had planned to work for the Park Service. My intention was always to teach school, but I was involved in a course at UT for a guidance counselor because I knew the day in 1961 more and more schools were going to require guidance counselors, and I was serving in that capacity. So I went and took what was required to become a federal employee, not to get a federal employment job, but to be able to answer questions that graduating seniors were asking, namely, what kind of questions are on a federal service entrance exam. And I took it in April 1961, and lo and behold, they called me in July 1961 at the park office and offered me the job. And it had more potential, and for 34 years I worked in an educational capacity as a park ranger. I was hired on first as a park naturalist, then because we began to hire more and more disciplines, musicians, home economic major, historians and so forth, recreation majors, we changed our title to the Division of Interpretation, and that's basically what I was involved with, giving lectures and guided walks and supervisory status.
Do you think that Pittman Center has kept its heritage?
A happy heritage?
Yeah.
I think Pittman Center is well blessed, and I think Pittman Center is unique among most all towns in the state of Tennessee because it's about 6 square miles, and there's no way today under the guidelines established by the state that Pittman Center could ever be established. But in 1974, we were having community get-togethers, open forum meetings, and the idea came up, why do not we ask for incorporation? So we decided to have a referendum that May in the general election, and our primary election, and put that on the ballot, and I believe around 130 people said, yes, we want to incorporate, and about 30 said no. So it was an overwhelming majority. So with about, I think, something like 300 residents in those days, we are about 500 now. But we would never be permitted to incorporate today, because if you incorporate under today's laws, you have to prove that you can provide the same services that large cities provide. Now, we were under obligation to provide protection to the citizens and roads. That was the 2 requirements placed on us when we became a city. But now we could not begin to provide all the services at Knoxville or Sevierville. We don't have a community center and so forth, but we could never become a city. But because we are located in a beautiful area, we developed zoning laws and land use management that, whereas we want to protect the environment, it has sustained us, and we know we're products of the environment and of the land, and we gear our thinking and our laws to protection. It will be a blessing in the future. And many people in the various parts of the county tell me, I do not know how long you will be able to keep your finger in the dike before the dam splits, but we love Pittman Center the way it is. It will probably be the only area 50 years from today that will represent the true heritage of Sevier County. And this is what makes a lot of the local citizenry and our other sister cities and county residents look upon Pittman Center as unique. And I remember what one person said, that if time continues, Pittman Center may be the model upon which other societies or other cities can look upon and say, that is the way we should have gone. And if we do that, I think we've given a good example now, and we will continue to do so. We're the only city that has a river running through it in the state of Tennessee that is considered 100% pure. In 1997, it was declared an outdoor natural resource waterways. And to have a stream that is of that caliber classification is most unique among cities. And the citizenry, when we had workshops in 93, 95, we had people continually say, we're interested in the school, we're interested in maintaining open space, and we're interested in the water. Those were consistently high upon all the requests that they wanted to focus in the direction that we wanted to see Pittman Center look 25 years from now.
How has Pittman Center changed in your lifetime?
Well, we were definitely agricultural in my day. No electricity. You did not have supermarkets. You did not have TVA to give us electrical power. So we were products of the land, and we lived on the land, and every household had at least 1 or 2 cows to give milk. And we were, I guess you might say, fairly well independent, because we ate what we produced. And when you came to the wintertime, you had to work to put up what you ate. And the main objective of preservation for food, you either dried, you salted, or you sulfured, or you pickled food. And the most valuable building on your farm was a smokehouse, because in that area it not only had the smoked hams or salted hams, but there you had your barrels of food that were going to sustain you, whether it be sulfured apples or pickled beans or kraut or barrels that would be vermin-proof so rats could not get into the beans or shell peas or whatever. If you had a lock on any building, it was usually on the smokehouse, because that was your supermarket. Then the other area was the realm of the forest was our not only our area of recreation where we could go hunting, and there were many good sources of food in the forest, not to mention the meat that you would get from squirrels and turkeys, but the vegetation. My mother raised 9 children and never took one of us to the doctor. And I was 17 years old before I first went to the dentist. We just did not have the, I'm going to say maybe the privilege of all the soft drinks, which I understand does cause a lot of the cavities, but we had our own beverage. It was, have you ever had birch tea?
No.
Beautiful. Birch tea and spicewood tea and other teas around the house, which you would need sometimes just for a diversion if you did not have milk. But it was also a delight to sometimes just brew and have, invite your friends in for a cup of birchwood tea. By the way, do you know why we are a coffee drinking nation? We are a coffee drinking nation because years ago when we got involved in our independence struggle against our mother country, the British began to tax the tea that our early forefathers were consuming. And that you've heard of the Boston Tea Party, when they went in on the ship and threw it all overboard. They decided right then if they wanted to tax the tea, they could find substitutes. And Oswego tea, it's a plant in the forest. I don't know if you know what it is or not, but it became known as the tea that the Americans would drink, do away with the tea that the British were sending us. And there was a little town up in state New York called Oswego. And it was a place that produced most of the Oswego tea that furnished the colonists their beverage until we finally switched to coffee. But how the Pittman Center changed, it's changed in many ways. The hillsides are all grown up. I remember cattle on all these hills. Right behind here that was cleared when I was a child playing down there, and I would hear cowbells ringing from the cows that would be ambling on the hillside above the parsonage, which was a clinic in that day. Because of the cornfields and the cow pastures that would ascend up the mountain slopes, you would have sounds traveling much better. Now sounds are buffered by a heavy or dense growth of forest. One of the things I remember, the last one I heard was in 1949. We used to have tolling of the bell when people died. I mean, if you ring a bell today, I don't think you'd even hear it because there's so much noise going on or buffered by the trees. But I remember the person we had at our church, at Hills Creek Baptist Church, would climb, they called him the sexton, would climb the belfry and ring the bell to get your attention. And then usually you knew who was sick in the community, either from various disease or old age, and you waited. It would, as I recall, it would ring 1 if it's a male, 2 if it was female. Then you were told the numbers of the years that that person lived on earth as kind of a memorial, but as also an announcement to the public, to the community, that we have lost a citizen. And work stopped. Nobody would work because out of due respect to the dead. And families began to assemble together to, and this is before we had funeral homes and the each family or a man in the community would usually try to keep enough lumber to make a coffin. And usually men would go to dig a grave while women started preparing for the wake. And the wake lasted all night long after the person died. And usually they buried them second, depending on the cold weather, usually they buried them by the second day. But that was home funerals. How else has it changed? With improved transportation, again, we're more centralized with medical facilities, and postmen did not get on the routes until around 1904, I believe, or 1905. We had the free rural delivery. That's where they would deliver to every person's home. Now that, we've always had a mail carrier in my day, but the old timers remembered that as one glorious day when the mail carrier began to deliver mail to their door. So changes do continue to occur, and that was what really phased out Pittman Community Center. Dr. Thomas he came here in 1928 as the physician after Dr. Burnett had built a clinic, and it was a needed entity in the community because we had already experienced a lot of communicable diseases right after World War II that was taking a lot of children off the scene due to the death of scarlet fever, influenza, smallpox. And when Dr. Thomas came, his work was cut out for him. And so he lasted until 1963, and there was kind of a standard rule that if you were 72, you would not be rehired. So they had a meeting concerning whether or not to let Dr. Thomas stay on. And I remember they brought in other physicians, Dr. Schilling from Gatlinburg, and also the educational aspect and protection and all. And it was decided that Pittman Community Center had fulfilled its purpose, that the money that would be used to maintain a mission outpost such as Pittman Community Center could be of more value maybe in more remote areas of the world. So Dr. Thomas went into retirement and they hired him on as chaplain, but he was also once a physician, always a physician, and he was chaplain at the Sevier County Medical Center until his death around 1983, I guess it was.
I didn't have any more questions.
Okay.
And before you do that, did you also bring some things?
Listen, Rebecca, one of the great love stories, other than mine, see, I told you I picked my sweetheart out in the first grade, and we soon will be married 50 years. But I think one of the greatest love stories, can you imagine living here in 1785? Actually, now it was 1790. Now, there was a Dr. Martin Schulz, a physician from Germany that was serving in the American Revolution and for the cause of freedom. And I feel sure, again, I can't prove this, but I'm sure that he must have known many of our Revolutionary War soldiers that came to this county and to East Tennessee. Well, he got as far as this Sullivan County, it's Kingsport area, and died and is buried there. Well, somewhere along the line, I always feel that the oldest son, Dr. Martin Jr., had knowledge of the Emmert family, and I'm sure he had remembered his first love, Barbara, the oldest daughter of Frederick Emmert. And I cannot fathom how they got here because they were really no known ways from Kingsport to Pittman Center. But they came, Mrs. Schulz came with 3 of her children, and Martin stayed here and married Barbara. And Mrs. Schulz and her, the two, her daughter married the Reagan, by the way, too. So she went back to Sullivan County, as I understand. But can you imagine crossing rivers and going through It's probably still a lot of Indian territory, but I thought it was a brave act for them to travel that 90 miles probably down here, probably 95, depending on where in Sullivan County that they came to get here, and yet they helped set up the motion that created large families, because the Reagan, her oldest daughter married the Reagan and moved on to Gatlinburg, while the Schultzes stayed here, and many of them went on up the way to Ward Webb's Creek, and Schultz Grove is part of the circuit of this church circuit here that the pastor pastors. Have you been there before, Schultz Grove? Beautiful little church. It's made popular because it was used in Dolly's homecoming episode that is seen by millions of tourists as the people go to see her Heart Song Theater and a movie production there. But it's a typical little church that was visible not only here, but many of our ancestors came from the New England states, just as Frederick Emmert came from Pennsylvania. And so many of the buildings and the structure and the architect here represented what they had there. And one of the other things, there used to be the hub of activity for about a century was up at the entrance of Greenbrier. There's where you had the post office. That's where you had the big supermarket, so-called. If you wanted to buy a horse collar or a bucket of lard, the Oddfellow Lodge, the doctor lived up there, post office up there called Pigeonville. But things shift around, and as the park movement came, that kind of phased out. And although there was a wayside station called the Emmer's Cove Post Office, it finally died too, and so did the Oddfellows Lodge, was torn down. Most all the members, which was, they're very, very active in the upstate New York and in the New England states, the Oddfellows are. It's an organization comparable to the Masons. But they were benevolent, the benevolent organization endowed with the conviction to help the less fortunate.
I understand that you taught school. What was it like to be teaching?
Well, teaching school at Pittman was coming back home, and I loved it because I had been in the Navy for 4 years, and I was so homesick to get back to the mountains. And I was on sea for 38 days at one time, and I am fed up with oceans. I don't even like ocean visits. My wife sometimes wants to go, and I take her, but I don't like the vacations at the ocean side. Give me the inside and mountains any day. But my wife taught school also. But we were teaching here. I taught for 3 years, as I said, from 58 through May 61, and we've kind of departmentalized in high school, the junior, senior high school. We taught various subjects. You would go to one teacher if you wanted to get the math. You'd go to another classroom if you wanted to get the science. You'd go to another class where another teacher was if you wanted to get some of the other subjects. Well, I was hired as a 7th grade homeroom teacher, and I had a beautiful 3 years. And I will relate the fact that we had chapel every day. And that's when we had the chapel every Friday, pardon me. When we had chapel, assembly, whatever you call it, that's where we were having public speakers, and I was inviting different speakers to come. And that's why I got interested in the more or less vocational guidance. And I remember particularly one day I had all boys. I had 35 boys, and then the next day I would have all girls. I was teaching history while they took phys ed. And I remember, as of 35 boys, I want to tell you why one boy told me what he's going to do one day. And then that amazed me. Here you are in the 7th grade, and you've already, well, see, I made my mind up in the 5th grade. I thought, that's really, you know what you're going to do. His decision was to go to work in Detroit with the Ford Motor Company. Well, the next day I asked all 35, told them that this young man had already made up his mind what he was going to do. And I just wonder if you have by any chance made up your mind what vocation you're going into. All 35 of those boys told me, and I kept track of them, and they entered the field that they had decided. So I think you can somehow become focused and stick to it if you got the conviction to follow through. Sometimes it takes a hard grind, and some of them, like I was, poor church mouse, but they went on to college and achieved what they intended to do.